Good morning.
Chairman McDermott, Ranking Member Linder, Congressman Davis, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Ralph Smith. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Baltimore-based Annie E. Casey Foundation, which is a national philanthropy devoted to fostering public policies, human services, and community supports that meets the needs of our nation's most vulnerable children and families. I'm here this morning because the Casey Foundation has had the privilege over the last decade and a half to support organizations of practitioners, researchers, policy wonks, and others who have essentially formed what has become known as the responsible fatherhood field. I would say we are particularly proud that what put the responsible into the responsible fatherhood field was the understanding that young men had to acknowledge paternity, and that triggered the recognition and support for young fathers. We are delighted as a foundation that the investments we have made over the past decade and a half have found their way into organizations that have done work that have garnered bipartisan support, and that has built a field worthy of respect. I must acknowledge that today's conversation would not have been possible were Congress not to have enacted the Family Support Act of 1988. It was that landmark legislation which put on the record and into play the issues of paternity establishment, jobs programs for education training, supportive services for young men who acknowledge paternity, unemployed parent coverage to help struggling families stay together and still receive assistance from AFDC. It was the research prompted by that program, the Parents' Fair Share and the Young Unwed Fathers pilot programs, which went a long way toward building the field. And Congress, the Welfare Reform Act and the Deficit Reduction Act, and more recently in the Second Chance Act, Congressman Davis, Congress has really made it possible for a large number of us to pay attention to this issue in fair, effective, and responsible ways. What we know as a foundation is what everybody else knows, that is that parents are the irreplaceable co-producers of good outcomes for their kids, and that kids do better when they have both parents loving them, caring for and about them, and supporting them. What we also know is that most fathers, regardless of age or circumstance, want to do their part for their children, and that most mothers want fathers involved in their children's lives. You know, the national focus on responsible fatherhood has paid off. As a foundation that cares a whole lot about data, we're going to avoid the attribution, causation, correlation question and just say that in the decade and a half, what we've seen is that the rate of teen births have gone down, that more fathers declare paternity, that more fathers live with their children, more fathers pay child support. And we think that these are all good reasons for continued optimism. As a foundation, we're going to look at three things, and we urge you to consider these three. One, investing in place-based strategies in these vulnerable neighborhoods where folks tried to work, to live, to worship, and to raise their children in difficult circumstances. To invest in two-generation programs, such as a Second Chance program where we pay attention to those who are coming out from incarceration who want to reconnect with their children and families and communities, as well as the children in those families who left unsupported will find themselves on the same trajectory as their parents. and to invest in what works. And if I may be so bold, and I think that was the invitation to provide some advice to this subcommittee, let me suggest 3 specific things that we can do. 1, we think that there's reason to believe that continued improvement of the child support system helps, and that there is some evidence that the pass-throughs and disregards which some states have put in place are in fact working. We ought to try to make those permanent and mandatory. Secondly, we ought to stop the clock on child support while fathers are incarcerated. To call incarceration voluntary unemployment seems oxymoronic at best. Thirdly, we ought to consider including non-custodial dads who are paying child support as eligible for the earned income tax credit. Now, these won't change the world, but they will make more than a modest contribution to the progress we're already seeing. Thank you very much for this one.